Welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans, for Ohio State fans. From the West Coast, I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Saturday, July 4th, 2026. Happy Independence Day, everyone, and thank you for joining me while I talk to myself about the view of your Ohio State Football Buckeyes through the lens of Phil Steele's 2026 College Football Preview magazine. I do this just about every year. I'm also going to talk about how Steele views the 5 toughest opponents on Ohio State's schedule. I think at this point we all know who those teams are: Texas, Indiana, USC, Oregon, and Michigan. So let's jump right into it. Of course, I want to start with where the Buckeyes land in Steele's national unit rankings. We did this very same exercise a few weeks ago on our last pod using Lindy's and Athlon preseason magazines, and I'm actually going to put their rankings next to Steele's rankings because I want to see how aligned the 3 magazines are in their view of the 2026 Buckeyes. So I'll be referencing those rankings here as well. Let's start with quarterback. Phil Steele has Julian Sayin and the Ohio State quarterback room rated number 3, behind Oregon with Dante Moore and Texas with Arch Manning. And this reflects a growing consensus that there is a clear top 3 at this position in college football this season, with Sayin, Moore, and Manning in some order, depending on which publication you're looking at. Athlon also ranks the Buckeye quarterback room at number 3, but they have Texas at number 1 and Oregon at number 2. Lindy's has their goofy backfield rankings, which combine the quarterback with running backs, and Ohio State lands at number 3 in their rankings as well. But Lindy's has Ole Miss with quarterback Trinidad Chambliss and running back Kawan Lacey at number 1, and Miami with quarterback Darian Mensah and running back Mark Fletcher at number 2. I don't know why Lindy's combines quarterbacks and running backs in their rankings. I mean, if this were 1976, when half of college football was running the wishbone and quarterbacks were running the football just about as much as running backs were, I think that would make sense. But in 2026, with infinitely more skilled quarterbacks running more sophisticated passing offenses, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know why they do that. In any case, there does appear to be real alignment here between these 3 publications that Julian Sayin is among the top 3 quarterbacks nationally. Phil Steele actually has Sayin rated number 1, ahead of both Manning and Moore in his top 60 draft-eligible quarterbacks, which would seem to suggest that Steele believes Sayin is the better NFL prospect, which I think is interesting. Steele is also in lockstep with Lindy's and Athlon in his view of the Ohio State receiver room. All 3 magazines rank the Buckeyes number 1 in the country at this position. Steele has a top 5 at this position of Ohio State, Oregon, Miami, Texas, and Clemson. I do think it's interesting that all 3 magazines are aligned with Ohio State at number 1 here, because after Jeremiah Smith, there are a lot of legitimate questions about the receiver room. I've already spent a lot of time exploring this topic this offseason, of course, and I don't want to spend too much time repeating myself here, but I think the 2 most likely options to be the number 2 receiving option behind Smith are a true freshman in Chris Henry Jr. and a veteran in Devin McEwen, who's been very productive, but spent his entire career in the American Conference with UTSA. If we're being realistic here, Henry Jr. and McEwen both have big adjustments to make playing at the Big Ten level. Now, I'm bullish on Henry Jr. If you listen to this podcast, you know that. I think he's going to be a very impactful receiver this season, but it might take 4 or 5 games for him to get there. And then after Henry Jr. and McEwen, we're talking about players in Brandon Inniss and Kyle Parker, who are both heading into year 4 of their college careers with very modest production. Inniss has 51 career receptions. Parker has 34. I've talked a lot about this already. Now, I'll be over the moon if this turns out to be the number 1 receiver room in the country, but I think there are at least 3 other schools in Texas, Oregon, and Indiana that have a legitimate argument here. And ironically, the Buckeyes play all 3, so we'll get to settle this question on the field this season, which should be pretty fun. Even as an Ohio State homer, I wonder if Steele, Athlon, and Lindy's might be overrating the Buckeye receiver room just a little bit. I still believe they'll be very good. And I think the key to unlocking the full potential of this position group is Chris Henry Jr. I've talked a lot about this already. If he can assume the role of the number 2 receiver and give this offense, 50 or 60 receptions this season, which is asking a lot of a true freshman, then I think the Buckeyes can live up to that number 1 ranking at receiver. Now, Steele isn't quite as high on Bo Jackson and the Ohio State running back room as Lindy's and Athlon. He has the Buckeye running backs rated number 11 nationally. He has a top 5 at this position of Missouri, Texas, Louisville, Miami, and Florida. Athlon has the Buckeye running back room ranked number 8 nationally. Lindy's, in their goofy backfield rankings, has Ohio State at number 3, but in their individual player rankings, they have Bo Jackson rated 9th nationally, which I think is a little bit more accurate. So all 3 of these magazines, I think, are pretty aligned here as well. I think the 8 to 11 range is probably a fair assessment of this position group for the Buckeyes right now. Now, I think the player to watch here is sophomore Isaiah West. West, I think, is the key to unlocking the full potential of this group. I really like what I saw out of West in 59 carries last season. He's smooth, and I think he might actually have a little bit more burst than Bo Jackson. If West can elevate to a 1B to Bo Jackson's 1A, especially with what promises to be an excellent interior offensive line, the Buckeye running backs, I think, can outplay these rankings. And, having a run game specialist in Arthur Smith calling the plays will certainly help this group's cause as well. Smith, I think, is another key to unlocking the full potential of this group. Phil Steele is bullish on the Ohio State offensive line this season. He has the Buckeyes ranked number 2, right behind Notre Dame. After the Irish and the Buckeyes, Indiana, Tennessee, and USC round out Steele's top 5 offensive lines. Lindy's has the Ohio State offensive line rated number 3. Athlon has them rated at number 4, as we remember. So again, all 3 publications are within the same range here. The Buckeyes are squarely among the top 5 units at this position. When we looked at the star potential of the 2026 Buckeyes a few weeks back, I had 3 players from this unit: Austin Sareveld, Luke Montgomery, and Carson Hinsman on my list. Steele has Montgomery and Sareveld as third-team preseason All-Americans. He also has Hinsman as the number 1 draft-eligible center and Montgomery as the number 1 draft-eligible guard. But in my estimation, the player that is the key to unlocking the full potential of this unit is redshirt sophomore Ian Moore. We've talked a lot about how Moore fits into the equation here. I don't want to spend too much time repeating myself, but at 6'6", 312 pounds with only 181 career snaps, he's more promise and potential right now than a proven commodity, but I think he's made the most of those limited snaps. Last season, Moore finished with an excellent PFF pass blocking grade of 83.3. If Moore can play well enough in fall camp to win the starting left tackle job, that will allow Austin Sareveld to move inside to right guard, where he's more naturally suited to play. And then I think we'd be talking about an offensive line that could legitimately win the Joe Moore Award. Okay, let's flip over to the defense, starting with the defensive line. And this is where I was very surprised to see where the Buckeyes landed in Phil Steele's rankings. Steele has the Ohio State defensive line rated as the number 1 unit in college football. Oregon, Oklahoma, Texas, and Notre Dame round out Steele's top 5. Look, I will turn cartwheels if the Buckeye defensive line turns out to be that good this season. I mean, I'm firmly on record that the interior of the defensive line has a chance to be very, very good with James Smith, Jonathan Walker, Edric Houston, and Will Smith Jr. I just don't know what Larry Johnson has at defensive end after Kenyatta Jackson. And in the case of Jackson, we're not really sure about the ceiling there. Now, Athlon has the Ohio State defensive line ranked number 7. Lindy's has it at number 8. And I think those are much more realistic rankings for the Buckeye defensive line. I'm just not sure there's the same ceiling for this unit as, for example, there was the 2024 unit, which Steele also had ranked number 1. Now, that unit had a future first-round pick in Tyleik Williams, a future second-rounder in JT Tuimoloau, a fourth-round pick in Jack Sawyer, and a future fifth-rounder in Ty Hamilton. Those were the starters. And the reserves included Caden McDonald, another future second-rounder, Caden Curry, who had 11 sacks last season, and Kenyatta Jackson. I mean, for context, Jackson is widely considered the best player on this year's defensive line. But in 2024, he wasn't even among probably the top 5 defensive linemen on that team. So while I appreciate Steele's enthusiasm for this unit, I do think, even as a Buckeye homer, I do think he's overrating it just a little bit. And as we think about a player that unlocks the full potential of this unit, 2 names come up for me. Edge Quay Rousseau, the Alabama transfer, and defensive end Bo Atkinson, who is now in his second season with the program after transferring from North Carolina last year. And I think I'm going to go with Atkinson here. Now, I've been a skeptic about his ceiling, but he does have more career sacks, 12, than any other player on the roster. I mean, that's That's worth something. Now, I'm not predicting that it's going to happen, but if Atkinson can become a consistent, disruptive force opposite Kenyatta Jackson on this defensive line, that will go a long way to unlocking its full potential. Then maybe, this unit will have a claim to be among the very best in the country. Steele's view of the Ohio State linebacker room is pretty aligned with Lindy's and Athlon. He has the Buckeyes all the way down at number 16. In Steele's view, Notre Dame has the best linebackers in the country, followed by LSU, Texas, Oklahoma, and Georgia. Lindy's and Athlon only ranked a top 10 at this position, and the Buckeyes did not make either of their rankings. Look, I get it. I understand the skepticism here, with the Buckeyes losing 2 top 10 NFL draft picks from this room in Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles. At the same time, I think this room is led by the best position coach in America, and that's James Laurinaitis. And there is a lot of raw talent in this room. It's just very young. Now, I feel comfortable with the floor of this unit with junior Peyton Pierce and senior Christian Allegro. I've talked a lot about both of those players this offseason. Pierce is probably going to wear the green dot for the defense. His PFF grades across the board last season were excellent. There really isn't anything he doesn't do well. Allegro, the Wisconsin transfer, look, he's been around the block, 881 career snaps. Now, most of his PFF grades won't blow you away, but he's a player I think that can be trusted in high leverage moments. And he does have a knack for getting after the quarterback. Allegro finished last season with a PFF pass rush grade of 81.2. That's an excellent grade. Now, Pierce and Allegro aren't likely to make Ohio State fans forget Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese this season, but I think they give this unit a reasonably high floor, and that's important. Now, I think the player that can raise the ceiling of this unit and help unlock its full potential is sophomore Riley Pettijohn. Pettijohn was a high 4-star prospect out of McKinney, Texas, the number 101 overall player in the 2025 class, according to 24/7 Sports. Now, he's still very green. He only played 77 snaps as a freshman, and he wasn't, unfortunately, a full participant in spring practices this year because of an injury. Pettijohn might still be a year away from being a high-impact player for this unit, but he's still a very gifted athlete working with the best position coach in America. If James Laurinaitis can have Pettijohn ready to go by September, I think this unit can play its way into the top 10 nationally. Now, there is almost always one ranking in Steele's preseason magazine that I vehemently disagree with, and this year it's the defensive backs. Steele has the Ohio State secondary all the way down at number 16 in his defensive backs rankings. Steele has a top 5 of Notre Dame, Oregon, Georgia, Iowa, and Miami at this position. Now, I think Athlon and Lindy's have a much better grasp on this unit than Steele. Athlon has the Ohio State defensive backs rated number 4. Lindy's has them at number 6. I've spent a lot of time talking about this unit this offseason, so I don't want to repeat myself too much here. But the secondary, I think, will be the best unit on this defense. Period, full stop. I think Ohio State is going to have the best trio of safeties in the country with Jalen McClain, Earl Little, and Terry Moore. McClain, by the way, is just hidden in plain sight in these magazines. He did not make the preseason All Big Ten teams of any of these magazines. Phil Steele and Lindy's did preseason first, second, and third All Big Ten teams. Not a single mention of McClain. That will turn out to be a huge whiff. I'd bet my 401k on it. I think McClain is going to have an All-American season. I also think the Buckeyes have an outstanding trio of cornerbacks in Devin Sanchez, Jermaine Matthews Jr., and Dominic Kelly, the UGA transfer. I've talked a lot about Sanchez over the last couple months. He was the number 1 prep cornerback and the number 5 overall player in the 2025 class, according to 24/7 Sports. Sanchez, I think, is the player that unlocks the full potential of this unit, folks. He's had an excellent spring and by all accounts is ready to be that next shutdown corner for this program. And if that happens, the Ohio State secondary, mark these words, will be as good as any in the country, and that includes Notre Dame. Finally, I said on our last pod that I'd be very curious to see where Ohio State would land in Steele's special teams rankings after poaching special teams coordinator Robbie Disher from Illinois and adding place kicker Connor Hawkins from Baylor. Now, Lindy's and Athlon don't do special teams rankings. The Buckeyes land at number 21 in Steele's special teams rankings, and he has Connor Hawkins, 4th team preseason All Big Ten, so okay, not bad. Now, if Robbie Disher is as good as the experts say, I think the Buckeye special teams can outplay that ranking. But look, I'll be more than happy if the special teams are just a top 25 unit. A top 25 unit, in my mind, means a group that can be trusted to do its job in high leverage moments. And look, I will take that any day over what Ohio State special teams has been over the last 4 or 5 seasons. 6 Buckeyes landed on Phil Steele's preseason All-America teams, but only one, Jeremiah Smith, made the first team. Julian Sand, Luke Montgomery, and Austin Sareveld made the third team. Earl Little, who is the only Buckeye defender to make one of Steele's All-America teams, made the fourth team. Finally, the pride of Eagle, Idaho, long snapper Dalton Riggs made the fourth team. I think it's a little odd that Steele had the Ohio State defensive line rated number 1 in the country and not a single Buckeye defensive lineman made one of his All-American teams. But looking at Steele's preseason magazines over the years, it's always full of contradictions. Anyway, Steele was more charitable when it came to his preseason All-Big Ten teams. Jeremiah Smith, Bo Jackson, Austin Sareveld, and Earl Little made the first team. Julian Sand, Luke Montgomery, John Walker, Peyton Pierce, and Devin Sanchez made the second team. Carson Hinsman, Philip Daniels, Quay Rusaw, Kenyatta Jackson, and Christian Allegro made the third team. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, Connor Hawkins made the fourth team. I've talked a lot about the Ohio State regular season schedule over the last few months, and I think it'll be the most difficult regular season slate for this program since 1999, and Phil Steele agrees. He rates the Ohio State schedule the 6th toughest in the country behind Texas, Michigan, USC, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. But Steele is undaunted by Ohio State's tough schedule. He has the Buckeyes finishing atop the Big Ten in a 3-way tie with Indiana and Oregon, and he has the Buckeyes finishing the season number 3 in his top 40 behind Notre Dame and Georgia. He's picking Notre Dame and Georgia to play for the national title, with the Irish winning it. Now, I assume based on Ohio State's number 3 finish, he has the Buckeyes winning the Big Ten title, getting a first-round bye, and advancing to the national semifinals before losing to either Notre Dame or Georgia. Before I sign off today, I want to have a quick look at how Phil Steele is thinking about the 5 toughest opponents on Ohio State's regular season schedule. That is, of course, Texas, Indiana, USC, Oregon, and Michigan. I'm going to go in order of how these teams fall on the schedule, starting with Texas on September 12th. Now, according to Steele, the Longhorns have the number 2 rated quarterback and running back rooms in the country. He rates their receiver group number 4 nationally, so the Longhorns are going to be very, very good, among the very best in the country at the skill positions. Now, he's not as taken with the Texas offensive line. Steele rates that unit all the way down at number 18, and that's something to pay attention to as we think about the Buckeye defense matching up with that unit on September 12th. On defense, Steele rates the Longhorn defensive line 4th nationally, their linebackers 3rd nationally, and their secondary all the way down at number 19 nationally. Again, that's something to pay attention to as we think about the Ohio State receivers matching up with that unit on September 12th. Finally, Steele loves the Texas special teams. He has it rated as the top unit in the country. Now, a staggering 10 Longhorns made Phil Steele's All-America teams. Offensive tackle Trevor Gooseby, defensive end Colin Simmons, linebacker Rasheem Biles, and punt returner Ryan Niblett made the first team. Quarterback Arch Manning and wide receiver Cam Coleman made the second team. Wide receiver Ryan Wingo and safety Jelani McDonald made the third team. Finally, defensive tackle Hero Kanu, the former Buckeye, and all-purpose back Hollywood Smothers made the fourth team. I mentioned it earlier, Steele thinks Texas will be facing the toughest schedule in the country this season, and that's probably explains why Steele has Texas finishing 2nd in the SEC behind Georgia and 4th in his final national top 40, despite having 10 Longhorns on his All-American teams. On October 17th, the Buckeyes traveled to Bloomington to play the defending national champion Indiana Hoosiers. According to Steele, the Hoosiers have the 12th rated quarterback room with Josh Hoover, the TCU transfer. Hoover threw for over 9,600 yards and 71 touchdowns for the Horned Frogs. He also threw a lot of interceptions for them, 33. Steele has the Indiana receiver room rated 11th nationally, which I think is too low. I think Charlie Becker and Nick Marsh, the Michigan State transfer, are going to be one of the better receiver duos in college football this season. Now, Steele isn't very taken with the Indiana running backs. He has that unit rated 44th, but he's bullish on the Hoosier offensive line. He has that unit ranked number 3 nationally behind Notre Dame and Ohio State. On defense, Phil Steele has the IU defensive line rated 10th, their linebackers rated 11th, which again seems a little low for a unit that has Isaiah Jones and Elijah Hardy, and he has their secondary rated 9th. Finally, the Hoosiers land at number 10 in Steele's special teams rankings. Now, an impressive 8 Hoosiers landed on Steele's All-America teams. Offensive tackle Carter Smith and linebacker Isaiah Jones made the first team. Receiver Nick Marsh, defensive tackle Tyreek Tucker, and linebacker Rolijah Hardy made the second team. Receiver Charlie Becker and safety Amari Farrell made the third team. Finally, cornerback Jamari Sharp made the fourth team. As I mentioned earlier, Steele predicts the Hoosiers will finish in a 3-way tie with Ohio State and Oregon for first place in the Big Ten. That's very interesting. Looks like he thinks Indiana and Ohio State will see one another again in the Big Ten title game, with the Buckeyes winning it this time around. And he has Indiana finishing 5th in his final top 40 national rankings. I assume that probably means a quarterfinal loss in the CFP for the Hoosiers. 2 weeks later, on October 31st, Halloween, the Buckeyes will play the USC Trojans in the House of Horrors known as the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. This will be for the first time since 2008. The Buckeyes were obliterated by the Trojans the last 2 times they played there. According to Steele, USC with Jade Mayava has the number 7 quarterback room in America. Now, with Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane off to the NFL, Steele thinks the Trojan receiver room will be a notch or two below what it was last season. He has the Trojan receivers all the way down at number 19 nationally. The USC running backs with Wayman Jordan and King Miller land at number 10 in Steele's running back rankings. Now, Steele is bullish on the USC offensive line. The Trojan O-line lands at number 5 in his national rankings. Now, on defense, this is where the challenge is for USC. Steele rates the USC defensive line at number 16, which is good, not great, but he has their linebackers at number 38 and their secondary all the way down at number 32. Finally, Steele has the USC special teams rated just ahead of Ohio State at number 20. Now, Steele does not have any Trojans on his All-American teams, which I think says a little something about how he views his team. And he has the Trojans finishing 4th in the Big Ten behind that 3-way logjam of Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon. And he has them finishing 11th in his final top 40. USC has the 3rd toughest schedule in the country, according to Steele, but he says, quote, if they take care of business at home, they'll be a playoff team, end quote. Now, that would involve beating the Buckeyes, of course. We'll see. Ohio State will be coming off a bye into that game. And after looking at some of Steele's unit rankings for the Trojans, I think I'm a little less concerned about this game for the Buckeyes than before we started this exercise. The following Saturday, on November 7th, the Buckeyes return home for a huge test against the Oregon Ducks. I said this before. I think Oregon has a legitimate case to be preseason number 1. This team is absolutely loaded. According to Steele, the Ducks have the number 1 rated quarterback room with Dante Moore and Nebraska transfer Dylan Raiola. Steele rates the Oregon receiver room number 2, right behind Ohio State. He has the Oregon running backs and offensive line both rated in the top 10 at 8th nationally. On defense, Steele loves the Oregon defensive line and secondary. He has both units ranked number 2 nationally. Now, he's not quite as taken with the Duck linebackers, though. He has that unit rated number 26. Finally, Steele isn't all that impressed with the Oregon special teams. He has that unit rated all the way down at number 40. Now, like the Hoosiers, an impressive 8 Oregon Ducks made Steele's All-American teams. Quarterback Dante Moore, defensive tackle Damari Washington, and safety Coy Parrish, the Minnesota transfer, made the first team. Center Iapani Laloulu, I hope I'm saying that right, and cornerback Brandon Finney made the third team. Finally, tight end Jamari Johnson, defensive end Mateo Uyangalale, and defensive tackle Bear Alexander all made the fourth team. As I've already mentioned, Steele has Oregon finishing in a 3-way tie for first place in the Big Ten with Ohio State and Indiana, but it looks like he thinks Ohio State and Indiana are actually going to play for the Big Ten title. Now, he has the Ducks at number 2 in his preseason power poll, and he says in the magazine that this is going to be Dan Lanning's best team in his 5 seasons at Oregon. However, he has Oregon finishing number 6 in his final top 40. Finally, it's Michigan. The Wolverines will visit the Horseshoe on November 28th, where, and it pains me to admit this, they have not lost to the Buckeyes since 2018. According to Steele, the Wolverines under new head coach Kyle Whittingham have the 29th rated quarterback room. And in all honesty, I think that's a fair ranking based on Bryce Underwood's underwhelming freshman debut last season. Steele isn't all that impressed with the Michigan receivers either. He has that unit ranked number 33 nationally. The Michigan running backs land at number 13 in Steele's rankings, but I feel like that that's a little low when you consider Jordan Marshall is still in that group. He's a pretty good running back. I think I'd have the Michigan running backs rated a little higher than 13th. Finally, the Michigan offensive line lands at number 11 in Steele's rankings, which is solid, but not quite up to the standard we've come to expect from Michigan offensive lines. Now, the strength of the Michigan defense, according to Steele, will be its line. He has that unit rated number 7. After the departures of Jashawn Barham and Ernest Hausman, Steele's expecting a step back for the Michigan linebacker room. He has that unit rated 30th nationally, and he rates the Michigan defensive backs at number 17. Again, well below the standard we've come to expect for those two units for Michigan. Finally, Steele isn't particularly impressed with the Michigan special teams going into the season. He has that unit all the way down at number 37, again, well below the usual standard at Michigan. And that might have a little something to do with the departure of star place kicker Dominic Zavada, who was such a weapon for the Wolverines during his time there. Steele only has one Wolverine, defensive end John Henry Daly, as preseason All-American. Daly made Steele's third team. Now, the Wolverines, according to Steele, have the second toughest schedule in the country behind Texas. Using Steele's final top 40 rankings, the Wolverines have home dates with number 13 Oklahoma, number 19 Penn State, and number 5 Indiana, and they have to travel to number 6 Oregon and number 3 Ohio State. Steele has Michigan finishing tied with Penn State for 5th place in the Big Ten and number 15 in his final top 40. I mean, similar to USC, after looking at some of these unit rankings for Michigan, which I understand aren't necessarily the gospel, I'm not quite as concerned about this game as I was before we started this exercise. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Now, I plan to have a much closer look at these opponents in my annual 5 games that will define the Ohio State football season. I do that every year. Look for that episode in the coming weeks. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.